I'm Tim Kremer, the Executive Director of the New York State School Boards Association. New York State's final budget agreement wrapped up earlier this month. In education, school districts had some wins and some losses. Here to discuss education and other important topics, I'd like to welcome my guest, Senator Shelley Mayer. So, Senator, the foundation aid in the school budget, in the state budget this year, that was approved, ended up about half of what advocates like our organization, many other advocates, the Board of Regents, the state Senate had asked for. Although twice what the governor had
started
proposed.
with, yes.
And tell us a little bit, was this a case of just splitting the difference, or how did it come about that you ended up with the exact same number of foundation aid as it was the year before?
Well, first place, our goal was to get much more. I believe, and my conference believed, that schools need and deserve, and in fact were owed, substantially more foundation aid. That's why we started with a number very close to what the regions recommended. The Assembly did as well. We were not satisfied at all. We did not split the difference. We were backed down by the governor in terms of revenues available, what he was willing to put on the table for foundation aid. And so, we did the best we could. We took from every other place that we could, and in fact did not fund many programs that we and my colleagues really cared about. We took money from those in order to push as much money into foundation aid as possible. I believe, and I think you will find across the state, people believe that are involved with schools. Schools need more. They've struggled with it to stay under the tax cap. They face a challenging environment in terms of their students. There's additional factors, including ELLs and special needs kids and additional free and reduced lunch and all the indicia of need that are greater that require schools to do better. And schools have been sort of teetering at the edge, and we need them to do well. So, no, we are not satisfied. We're profoundly disappointed. This was just, it's a negotiation. You do the best you can. We did the best we could. And then we tried to drive it where we could to schools with the highest need.
Which you did a good job with.
Thank you. We it's not perfect, and so many schools did not get what they need,
right,
either to avoid having a budget gap next year, in their next fiscal year, or in fact to meet the needs of their students. My base is the City of Yonkers School District, 27,000 kids. They continue to have a substantial deficit, notwithstanding that we got them additional money. Right. So, and that's true for others in my district, Portchester and Ossining, others downstate in the suburbs, Long Island, and upstate. I met with 10 of Senator Betty Little's superintendents facing also substantial challenges upstate. So, we did the best we could in a negotiation. We did a budget on time, very important, and important to school districts, I would add.
Absolutely.
And important to the state. And we negotiated the best we could. The state had declining revenues, probably because of this Trump tax plan, in my opinion. And we had to do the best we can. But it was not a willing split the difference. It was, we did what we had to.
We do know that the governor holds most of the cards in these budget deliberations, and there probably were some unrealistic expectations of people thinking, oh, well, the Senate shifted over to the Democrats and there will be money for all.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I think the expectations were such that it was going to be a much different year, and it ended up being a very similar year to what it was last year as far as the foundation aid amount. And so I think there was a level of disappointment, but honestly, I would tell you, I don't want to suggest and end it there, the fact that you added $1 billion in school aid in total and $600+ million in foundation aid, that's a big deal. I've shared those kind of numbers with my colleagues in other states.
Yes.
And they're going, wow, that's like our whole budget.
Well, I think there were several things that we did well, and I take pride in. One is we came in as a new majority, as you pointed out. I was fortunate to be named chair of the Senate Education Committee. We made it our point to go out and speak to school districts throughout the state. This idea that, we were going to be a New York City-centric, downstate focused. I mean, I was pleased to come to the school boards and the superintendents and speak to the school administrators and go meet with the districts throughout the state. I think that was very important that we convey, and we continue to convey. We are committed to every child and every school district. So that's number one. Two is while on money we are disappointed, on policy we did some good things. Some things I know some school districts have trouble with, but we did, BOCES salary cap, a huge deal, many years waiting to be done. We got it done. We rejected a number of the governor's proposals that have been terrible for school districts, the bundling of some of the reimbursable aid.
Right.
And so there was the pushback was substantial. We tried to get building aid forgiveness as a statewide issue. We didn't get it. As you may have known, we just moved a number of bills through my committee that are going to give individual districts forgiveness for building aid penalties, and we're going to continue to push that issue.
Well, in fact, we just put out a press release
I saw that.
where we are thanking your conference for doing that, and there are quotes there from several superintendents who are very specific about senators who have really gone to bat for them, and we do appreciate that. Let me talk a bit about the permanent tax cap.
Right.
So here was something that the Senate actually passed before the budget was introduced, early January.
Right.
You passed this. Kind of a surprise, quite honestly. And you had that. The governor, of course, wanted a permanent tax cap all along. How did you go about, you and the governor, go about convincing the Assembly to go ahead and pass that permanent tax cap without much in the way of any changes to the existing cap?
Well, let me just say about the tax cap. I represent probably one of the highest tax counties in the state, Westchester. The average tax, property tax, is well over $15,000, $20,000. Yep. And for many people, including people who do not have an ongoing relationship with our school districts, they're seniors, their kids have grown, or they don't have kids, they are resentful, and rightly so, that taxes are making it very difficult for them to continue to live in communities they chose to live in. And I wouldn't underestimate the impact of this federal tax change, the SALT deduction, on communities like mine where people moved to the suburbs. They thought, I'm willing to pay a lot because my kids are going to go to an excellent school, but I'm going to be able to deduct my property tax over $10,000. Now they can't. So there were changes that I think called out for a response on behalf of property taxpayers, and I'm pleased we did it. The Assembly did have a lot of pushback against it. One thing that we did do that is not reflected in the language is Tax and Finance was already authorized to consider BOCES capital in the consideration of the school districts.
Yeah, that goes back several years.
But they didn't ever do it.
Right.
So now there's an agreement they're going to go ahead. And it's not fair that school districts get, really stuck with this capital cost that they have nothing to do with and no control over. And so we are very hopeful that will be a carve-out for school districts in computing their tax cap. But overall, I would say, there is a movement against the notion that property taxes are going to be the way we fund everything, whether it's education or municipal services. And while the state is cutting back in terms of AIM, for example, aid to municipalities, we just can't place additional burdens on property taxpayers. So I'm very mindful of that. I'm glad our conference did it. I'm glad the Assembly came along. I hope that we can work on some potential modifications that address, particularly for school districts, the challenge of staying within the tax cap. The one thing I've said very frankly is our schools have to be community resources. They do not belong only to students in pre-K through 12th grade. The more they become community resources, the less resentment there will be about paying the taxes for our schools, which are part of the institution and fabric of our communities.
Well, the truth be known, if you have a capped budget, a budget that you're offering that is at or below your tax cap, you got a 99% chance of passing that budget.
Absolutely.
So it does offer a level of predictability that we did not have before. I admit that. But for some districts, they would tell you that we just can't raise enough money locally.
Yes.
And now it being permanent, it would suggest that if we try to exceed the cap, we're somehow getting greedy. And so it places us in a little bit of a defensive posture.
Yes.
And of course, state aid is what we're going to have to depend more and more upon. And we'll see how this all balances out going forward.
Well, to that end, Tim, I just want to say that, the Senate Democrats said we were going to reevaluate how schools are funded. And we are going to be holding a series of hearings on the basis for school funding, moving away, hopefully, from a reliance on property tax to a fairer system that bases it on need across the state and it finds another sources of revenue that are not property tax. We are going to be examining what other states have done, and we are going to look at the basics of the foundation aid formula. And I think it's outdated. I think it's the best we have, but we need to start again.
Yeah, now we got a new thing that I haven't even been able to examine in depth, and that is different formulas. There's like 10 different formulas, tiers now that are being checked off as to what tier you fall into. So it's gotten even more complicated.
It's complex.
The foundation aid formula, as it was proposed originally, was intended to be simple, and it's anything
it's
but.
Not simple.
And I would tell you again, working with all my counterparts across the country, I haven't found one yet that likes their state aid formula.
Okay.
So good luck with that.
Good warning.
Let's talk about marijuana.
Yes.
So originally, one of those policy positions that the governor wanted to see passed was put into the budget. There were a number of organizations, including ours, that said, really, is that a budget issue? Isn't that got some public policy implications? Doesn't that require a little more look-see to make sure this is smart? Talking to law enforcement, talking to medical professionals, talking to social scientists and educators and people like that, wouldn't it make more sense to take our time and make sure we're doing the right thing? Then there's a whole bunch of financial implications around this as well. So it got pulled out.
Yes.
We're appreciative of that. What do you think is going to happen next when it comes to the legalization of the adult use of recreational marijuana?
Right, those are all the right words. Well, I think that I am not out of the mainstream of elected officials who face a lot of concern in their district. Certainly for myself as chair of education, in the school community, there's grave reservations about moving ahead too quickly. That notwithstanding it will be adult use, that it will become more accessible for children, more popular. It's already quite accessible to children. That because of concerns about vaping and other activities by students that we already have in our schools, the school community is concerned. The law enforcement community is concerned. The parents of children who have struggled with opioid abuse are very concerned, and I've heard from all of them. So I think I'm in favor of a slower approach. I would say that young people think we are crazy, that my children, for example, my adult children think I'm quite out of step.
Mine too.
I'm sure, but that being said, I'm not convinced that we have to move ahead as quickly as the governor would have wanted. I don't know what's going to happen. There's still a very strong push to do it, and both as a source of revenue and for people who think that we're fooling ourselves. It's already out there. That being said, I think there may be more thoughtful and slower ways if we're going to move in that direction. I'm not sold on moving that way. I'm in the look and see model as you are. We'll wait and see the next few months how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And if it happens this legislative session, so be it. But if it gets extended into some other time, we'd be okay with that.
Okay, understood.
All right. Commissions. There's been, I don't know if this is new or not, but it's getting a lot of attention now where there's some controversial, complex decision that needs to take place. For example, congestion pricing down in Manhattan or election reforms. And the decision has been made, let's assign that to a commission that will have the force of law, that when they decide how this should be handled, that becomes the law. So it's not the legislature voting on the law, the legislature's putting together a commission.
Right.
What do you think of the use of these commissions?
Well, I'm troubled by it in some contexts and not in others, and I would make the distinction. Like on election reform, I'm not happy about that. I do think that's a legislative function. We should vote on changing campaign finance. I was in favor of supporting a change. How many parties there can be, the rules about that, that's a fundamental process that it seems to me elected officials should vote on, take responsibility for their vote, face the consequences of their vote, be able to articulate why they support or oppose something. So I did not favor the commission to examine that. I thought it was a punt. And I think it's also an intention to take power away from the legislature and a co-equal branch of government. You know, we have a challenge on our hands with reasserting our power in this process. In the budget, clearly, as you point out, the governor has the upper hand by virtue of court decision. Right. Outside of that, we should be equal, and we're going to continue to assert our equality. In the congestion pricing, I think it was different. That commission is to actually make thoughtful decisions about sort of how much the toll is, what the lines are, how many exceptions there are. I know from my district, some people need to drive into Midtown Manhattan, and they may need an exception. Taking medical use, that is an exception in the bill. That is a different kind of very technical commission that has the authority to set fees. But when it's a legislative function, as it was here and it was in the Pay Raise Commission,
Right.
I think it's a dangerous precedent to minimizing the role of elected officials. I mean, the point is, you got to be able to take a vote and stand by it, and lose if your constituents think it's wrong. That is the nature of the process. We ought not to either immunize elected officials nor cede power to
Right.
another branch. So I'm not a fan of them.
Yeah, I hear that. And I see when there's a real technical thing,
Yes.
having this study group over here.
Exactly.
But having this force of law,
That
adds a whole new layer of, I guess, import to these
well,
groups.
and I think on this election reform, if we don't get in there and change it within a very little narrow window,
Yeah.
it has a force of law. I think that does not sit well with me. It did not sit well with my colleagues. Again, in the context of the budget, it was what we accepted. There's things we don't like in the budget. I did not like that, and I didn't like some of the language in it. I don't like the idea of it. A budget is a mixed document, and on balance, particularly because the school aid was in there, I was for it.
Somebody once told me that the definition of a budget is the allocation of disappointments.
Yeah, but I'm a very optimistic person. I wouldn't be here at
There you
this
go.
stage. There were some very good things we did in a troubled,
Absolutely.
challenging economic time. Let us not walk away from the fact that the state had substantially fewer revenues than we had hoped,
And a lot of competing interests.
and competing interests, but less money.
And I get that. Thinking of commissions for one more time, is there any chance you think that the whole idea of legalizing marijuana gets handed off to a commission?
I think it's within the realm of possibility. It's a punt of difficult decisions.
Is that a technical or is that a legislative?
I think that's a legislative
I do
function.
too.
We should vote.
Absolutely. But it could get pushed over. In fact, the whole idea of putting it in the budget would allow some people to say, well, I voted for the budget. I had
Yes.
to hold my nose regarding
Exactly.
marijuana, but you got what you needed locally.
Exactly.
So we're not a big fan of burying all this stuff in the budget or
I am
in
not
commissions
either.
either.
I am not either.
So you're sponsoring a bill that
Yes.
we like very much. It is Senate Bill 4720, and it would require at least one school board member on every industrial development agency board. Why did you introduce this legislation?
Well, I'm very concerned about these industrial development agencies. I mean, I'm all for economic development. My community is booming with it. Much of it with tax breaks and financing offered by industrial development agencies. These are quasi-public. They're basically appointed by the chief municipal officer. They sort of do what the city or town wants. They can offer a tax break that has an absolute impact on our school district. And the school district is not in the mix. Right. Either more, develop housing with more students without any contribution to property tax. They may offer a tax break that ultimately separately impacts a school district's funding. We have to have a unified conversation about development before we use public money. This is not a private deal. This is public money to induce development. Again, yes, but make it a fair conversation. Have someone from the school board sit there and say, now, how many kids are going to be coming into our district? Are you going to be contributing to our school tax requirements?
Well, I appreciate
and we also want notification to school districts when decisions are made that are going to impact that district.
So these IDEAs oftentimes will approve a pilot in lieu of taxes,
Yes.
Payment in lieu of taxes
Yes.
Pilot. Also, I know in one instance I was involved in, the IDA had approved the building of a structure right next to a school that the school objected to.
Exactly.
This is not a good thing to have next to a school, and yet they had no control over that.
Yes, and that's not right. We're going to have substantial reforms to IDAs, and part of it is going to be engaging a bigger conversation, having more votes on that IDA board. It should not be a rubber stamp for what one person who runs a municipality, who's elected, wants to do with public money. Again, that building that you described is either partially funded by a tax deferral or something else
Right.
with public money. Let the public input, and the school district is part of the public apparatus and deeply affected by these IDA decisions. So, I think with my colleague, Senator James Skoufis, we are together going to push back on some of these IDA practices.
Well, we appreciate it. Well, Senator, I really do appreciate it.
pleasure.
First of all, congratulations on your appointment as
Thank
the
you.
chair of the Education Committee.
Big deal.
A lot of stuff going on there. You're going to be very busy, and they chose wisely
Thank you.
in
That's
putting
very
you there.
nice
So
of
we
you,
really
Tim.
do appreciate that, and thank you for being on the show.
Look forward to it.
Thank you, Senator Shelley Mayer, for joining me today. Until our next edition of Newsmakers, have a good day.